Good day everyone, and welcome to Civ 7's biggest update yet, Test of Time. The update we've all been waiting for, Civ 7 2.0 or 1.0 depending on who you ask. This update is enormous and we have got 34 pages of patch notes to work through, so let's get straight into it. If you've been living under a rock, the three main features that have been revamped with this update are that you can now start and stay as any Civ in any age. That's the biggest change by far. 2. Legacy paths have been replaced with a new system called Triumphs, and 3. Victories have been reworked and are now something you can work towards from turn 1 of Antiquity, rather than being restricted to just the modern age. So before we get into too much of the detail here, they've put a little warning here for mods. Of course, we can just expect in general that all mods are going to be broken as of this patch. If they still continue to work, that's great, but I had some issues while I was playing the preview build, so just make note of that you're probably going to have to start from scratch on your mods. Backwards compatibility, if you're an absolute madman, then of course you can still try and play one of your old saves on the new Test of Time update, but I cannot imagine what that experience is going to look like for you. Alright, so leading one civilization, I mean this is the biggest feature of the whole patch, so every single civ when you start up the game is now available to play, so that's 30 plus civs rather than the 10 we had before. So a huge amount of new content has essentially been added with this change. So how does it work? So instead of the usual civic tree, time-tested civs will receive their own civic tree made up of the following. And I think we have a picture down here. So it's kind of covered up by the tooltip. It's probably not the best example, but you can see we're playing as America here in the Antiquity Age. So they get their own unique civic here, Gold Rush 1. So +1 settlement, +1 golden settlements for every resource assigned to them, as well as +1 settlement limit and +1 tradition slot. Behind this tooltip here are two generic civics. One of them is the syncretism, which we'll talk about a little bit later, I suspect. And the other one is a generic civic that is going to be related to your civ's attributes. So America, I would assume, is economic and militaristic, or economic and expansionist. So they'll have some unique civics there that pertain to those sort of attributes. And here it is in action here, just another screenshot. So it's exactly what you'd expect it to be, the same as if you were playing, an Antiquity Civ in the Age of Antiquity before. You've got your own unique civic tree in this second tab here, secondary to your regular civics that everyone shares, the regular civic tree. So syncretism and affirmation. So this has been slightly changed throughout every workshop. It's all been different. It talks a little bit about it here, but I think the easiest way is just to show it. Hopefully there's a screenshot down here. There is. So when you research this civic up here, so you have to go through American origins, for example, to get to syncretism. So you always have to research your first origin civic first, and then this will unlock the option of syncretism. So like I said, this has been changed a few times, but essentially how it works is that in this scenario, I think, you're playing as the Abbasid, right? So you have your Abbasid affirmation, and this is new. So this is essentially, instead of taking something from another civ, like the other sort of syncretism options we've had before, this means that you can just double down and stays the Abbasid, real pure. So you don't take anyone else's infrastructure, you don't take anyone else's units, you just get this new civic here and a tradition slot that should play into what you're trying to do. Now, this Abbasid one it's an okay example, but I would have thought this would relate to specialists somehow. But that's essentially the gist of it, is that it doubles down on your civ's identity and you stay exactly the way you are. If you're not doing that, then what you can do is take something, or take a bit of infrastructure or a unit from one of the civs that you are related to. So the Abbasids, for example, would be geographically related to Egypt and Persia here, for example. So you can take either the Egypt quarter, the Egypt's unit, Persia's unit, the Immortal, or Persia's unique improvement here, the Paradisa. So those are your options. I think the affirmation option was a really good addition. So pretty keen to play with that. You can see, the artwork here as well that you get, showing off your civ's artwork if you do decide to make that affirmation. Pretty cool stuff overall. I think the UI here is pretty chunky, but that's par for the course for Civ 7. Now, as for the AI, this is something that a lot of people ask seemingly every time this comes up. So this is a lot of words to say that they basically can mirror you. That's by default, they'll do exactly what you do. So if you decide to go from Han China to Ming China to Qing China and advance throughout the ages, they'll do the same. If you decide to play as Ming China for the entire game and never swap, the AI will do that as well. Now, you can change that. You can basically have them do whatever you want. You can, of course, still do the, Egypt becomes Mongolia, becomes Japan, and the AI will follow you in that as well. So it really just comes down to how you want to do it. But I think the default is perfect. I couldn't think of a better implementation for this than making the AI just follow your lead. Okay, on to the next big feature here. We have Triumphs. So the direct replacement for legacy paths, despite what some people have tried to tell me, Triumphs have completely replaced legacy paths, and they are, ideally, what they're meant to be is a lot more flexible. So rather than having, one way in which you could progress the cultural tree in antiquity, for example, which was this one here, building 7 wonders, and you would be rewarded at 2, 4, and 7 wonders with those legacy path points. Now there are several different triumphs you can take. So the 3 cultural ones here, for example, and these allow you to take these dedications into the next stage. So these are very similar to the previous system, except instead of getting points that you can spend on different dedications, you have to complete this task to get this dedication, and complete this task to get this dedication, etc., etc. So they are in some ways less flexible, in some ways more flexible. But this isn't meant to be an opinion video. I've spoken about triumphs at length on this channel recently throughout all the workshops. But this is the new system, and I think it's overall, despite what I've said, it's received really, really positive feedback from the community. Whether that'll come down to the newness factor and if people are just enjoying them now because they're different and they visually look less linear than legacy paths, time will tell. I think the UI here could probably leave a lot to be desired, but that's okay. Dedications. So this is what I was just talking about before. So you can pick dedications. There's going to be some default ones that you can always take. I can probably throw some screenshots up on the screen here for you to show what some of those are. But the main rewards you're going to be going for is from completing the major triumphs. So that's these dedications here. So again, you don't get these rewards instantly. That's what minor triumphs do. And, there's no screenshot here, but minor triumphs are almost the exact same. However, they give you the reward instantly. In fact, we can actually go ahead. We can jump in game here and I can show you some of these live. So this are the triumph screens. These are all the major triumphs up the top here. With the dedications you get for each of these. You can see we've got crisis triumphs as well, worth keeping in mind. So I had the independent power, the Barb crisis. So you get these special cards you can work through here. And these are all the minor triumphs. So, for example, when you reveal 33% of the map, you get an instant satellite in your capital. If you improve, all of the natural wonders on your homelands, you get +1 food on breathtaking tiles. So all that sort of thing. They're all here. These are the minor triumphs. And I think these are generally a lot more satisfying. But that is triumphs in a nutshell. So there's a lot to work through, and these change every single age as well. Coming back to the notes here, it's interesting as well that similar to the previous systems, you actually get some default triumphs from leveling up your leader as well, which again was a thing with the old dedication system. But they were always pretty bad. I have to wonder what they'll look like with this new system. I wonder if they've changed those, because they used to just be something like plus 15% science for minus 15% culture, or all that sort of thing. And they weren't very good. Again, this is a little mention about the crisis triumphs here as well, which I think is one of the cooler parts of the crises. Again, these were already in the game under the previous system, but they were basically hidden. In fact, they were completely hidden. They were not in the UI anywhere, any of these objectives. So at the very least, I'm thankful to Triumphs for bringing this to the light and making it so it's a lot more obvious that you do have goals to complete during the crisis if you want to. Interestingly as well, this is something a lot of people have been asking for since launch. So you can now, as before, you can change your capital on age transition. But this doesn't cost a dedication slot anymore. So back to the live version, unlike in the workshop where it actually cost you one of your 3 slots. And you can now select from this drop-down menu, and you can pick any city you want to be your capital in the next stage. So that's going to be a big improvement. I think it was always weirdly restrictive that the game kind of randomly picked 2 cities for you. I know it wasn't random. I think it was based on population. But either way, it didn't feel great. So you now have a lot more freedom to actually pick the capital you want in the next stage. Following on from Triumphs, we have Triumph sets. So what I showed you before was the default set, with standard list of 30 Triumphs per age. Now this is something I'm very, very sketchy on. I really don't like these Triumph sets at all. I think this is personally the completely wrong direction that I would be taking these. I don't like the idea of having different sets. I think this dilutes the vision of the game. I really don't get what this is adding. These triumphs are in some ways quite similar to era score and, those historical moments from Civ 6. I can't imagine wanting to change era score in Civ 6 to be restricted to specific sets so that, I only got era score when I was doing, warmongering things. I just think these are really, really odd in general. So there's 5 here by default at launch. I'm just going to be playing on the default one every single time. They've put in the classic set here, which I think is just bizarre, for those who liked the original Legacy paths. I mean, no one's going to be, even people like myself who didn't mind the Legacy paths at all, no one's going to be playing with this classic set one. It's just a really bizarre addition, in my opinion. And they've talked about adding more as well. So in future updates, they'll add more Triumph sets. Again, I really don't think that's the way to go, but that's okay. Moving on from Triumphs, let's talk about Victories. So Victories have been completely reworked, most of them anyway. So Military is probably the most similar. So what it's worth, there's these 4 terms that you get familiar with. So dominion, tourism, GDP, and innovation. These are the new currencies, quote unquote, for all the different victory types. So dominion points are how you're going to earn a military victory, for example. And I can show you this in game as well. So let's go back to the in-game screen here. We're playing as Alex in a domination game. So a great example here. If we go to the military screen, so you can see here, these are this is your dominion here. So I've got 67 dominion. So you can see here the breakdown as well. It gives you a bit of a tooltip here showing you why each settlement gave you a certain, the amount of score it did. So the original capital here, I think I took over Ibn Battuta's capital. So that gives, 4 as a base and then an additional 4. So double points for taking the capital. This one here got an extra 2 points because of Alex's bonus, King of the World. So that would have been a city that had a wonder in it. So all the victories have their own new win conditions now. You can see, we'll talk about these in a bit, but you can see the breakdown here of how you get dominion exactly, and these change over the ages as well. So that's military victory, and again, these are all quite different from the workshop in some ways. So cultural and economic, for example, have had probably the biggest makeover in general. I was very critical of some of these during the workshops because they were really repetitive, and you unlocked pretty much all the tools you needed to win the game from turn 1 of antiquity, or at least turn 1 of each age. Now, what they've done is they've actually spread out where you get the points from a lot better. So if we look at economic here, for example, to get +2 GDP per turn for each gold building from the current age, but that's only after you research currency. Now, this one maybe isn't the best example, a bit superfluous because you can only start building gold buildings once you get currency here when you unlock the market. But take the wheel, for example. So now you have to focus a bit on science, have to make some decisions around, well, am I going to go for GDP mainly from buildings, in which case I'd probably go up the top path here of the science tree, or am I going to go mainly down the sort of military or domination path here down towards the wheel, get lots of resources potentially from conquering towns or from trade, and then you get GDP per turn from resources. So down here, again, we've got the nested tooltips here as well. If you missed that feature, that's new. So great addition there from Firaxis. But yeah, I think in general, these have been made a lot better. There's probably some more examples in here that I haven't touched on. So for science, for example, there's these new projects that grant innovation. You need 100 innovation to start, sending your rocket to space in the modern age. Science is notably the only one that you have to win in the modern age. The others can actually be won earlier, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But these projects have some pretty interesting effects associated with them. So spherical Earth here in mathematics gives you, 5 innovation and a scientific attribute point. Navigation gives you 5 innovation and 2 free purchases of the altar. And there's a few different projects like this in all the ages, so it's pretty cool stuff overall. I really, really like what they've done with some of these. Again, I think some more examples in here. Entertainment, for example. So now you no longer get the tourism from celebrations just by default, which again was, just made it really non-impactful, completely non-impactful, I would say, because you just wanted celebrations anyway. Now you have to make a conscious decision to go to entertainment to get that tourism from celebrations. And we've got some more effects here. So literacy, for example, gives 2 innovation there, and skilled trades down here gives GDP per turn from imported resources assigned to cities. So I think they're really fantastic updates overall compared to what we had in some of the workshops. So going down here to the victory through dominance, and this doesn't, it makes it sound like a military thing, but these are the thresholds for the victories. So like I sort of alluded to earlier, you can now win the game in exploration. So as early as 50% through the exploration age. But all of these victories now are a race. So if we go back into the game here, the points goals here are empty. These will fill in once you get to that 50% mark in exploration. But these are essentially all competitive win conditions now, except for science, which remains, a one-person race. It's very individual, I guess you could say. The rest of these, however, are all competitive. So to win a transcendent victory, which is, going to be very difficult on deity, for example, you have to have 6 times the second player's score. So for example, here, I'm, on 67 military points. If I wanted to win a transcendent victory halfway through exploration, I would need 120 points if Ada was still on 20 here. It's all about who's second place, and, you're always trying to drag the person who's coming second down. Or you can try and get ahead of yourself. So that's the kind of new dynamic that they've implemented here. The victories are a little bit finicky. I wish these were significantly more granular than they are now. These thresholds jump a lot. So from 6 times down to 4 times, down to 3 to 1.5 and 1.25. Particularly, these ones here in modern going from 3 to 2 to 1.5 are really big jumps. And I think that's where 90% of games are going to end probably in these two categories here. So I'm not sure how I feel about these in general. I think we'll definitely see these change a lot in future. To be honest, I don't expect these to last last the test of time, you could say. And once you hit this threshold for what it's worth, the game doesn't just end. So a 5-turn countdown begins. Again, because the threshold all changes at the same time, at the same spot for every player, I think this is going to result in a lot of ties, particularly in multiplayer, as a lot of people's countdown will start at the same time. Now, they do talk a bit about here, I think about, the tiebreaker system is based on stuff like your placement in the victories, so the other ones that you're not even on a countdown for, and how many major triumphs you've done. I don't know how I feel about that. I mean, it's probably the best system you could have in place for a tiebreaker, but I still think it's pretty unsatisfying overall. The countdown is a little bit anticlimactic, is how I would describe it. So in terms of the UI and the UX, I mean, there's a lot going on here. You'll notice just as you're moving around this update that everything feels a little bit different. So they're probably going to talk about the commerce screen in here, for example, the policy screen. Everything's just going to feel different and new. So that's a really good feeling for an update, especially one as big as this. So let's talk about the commerce screen first. There's some really good stuff in here. So this looks very different right off the bat. We got some unassigned detail here. So if you didn't know, it was kind of a hidden mechanic before, somewhat hidden anyway, particularly at launch. Every resource you have unassigned gives you +1 gold and happiness per age. So that's now clearly displayed here, which is nice. Now, as you move resources in and out as well, it shows you what that's going to do to your yields, which I think is really fantastic. They've got all these little tags here as well that show you at a glance how much of stuff you have. So, I've got 3 warehouse buildings in this settlement. So this clay is giving, well, because of the happiness, it's a little bit off, but you get the idea. It's giving 3 production by default. So yeah, I think these are all really fantastic additions. We've also got stuff like unassign all. That's a really good addition. If we scroll down here as well, there is an unassign all button. So if you want to get rid of every single resource in every settlement, you can do that as well with one click. I kind of wish this was up, locked to the bottom of the screen here, like around here. But that's okay. It's a minor gripe. But overall, this has gotten a lot better as the workshop's gone on in some ways. I think it's still a little bit chunky. I would really hope that you could see, 6 or 7 or 8 settlements at a time rather than how many you can see here. But I understand screen space is at a bit of a premium, but I still think there's room for improvement for this screen for sure. The trade route screen here as well, I think has a little bit of potential. I particularly like the available one. So it's meant to sort of show you, what trade routes you have open to you, which used to be, well, it still is down here as well. So in this trade lens here, this is still here, but I guess they're trying to move us generally over to this tab where everything will be centralized. The Empire tab is still here as well. I do miss the Empire resources being up here. It was just such a, similar to this, unassigned section over here. It was very compact and it was just very neat and tidy. Now it's on its own screen. It's quite bulky, but that's the new commerce screen. Some ups and some downs, but I think it's overall, it has more potential than the old one and it looks a bit nicer as well. So drag and drop now works, which is fantastic. So that's good to see. Another little quality of life thing that's great too is you can now just, even if this resource screen over here is full, I can move these camels over here and it automatically slots them in. Just a really nice quality of life change there. So here's the commerce screen. As I said before, we touched on trade routes a bit here as well. So you can preview all of the currently viable trade routes. Now the explanations as to why they're unlocked, I'm not entirely sure why they're not showing up here, to be honest with you, but it usually gives you a little sort of indicator on why or you can or cannot make a trade route. So if it's out of range or if it's on a different continent. I think that also has a lot of potential, presenting this information to the player as to why they can and can't make a trade route. But I think it still has a long way to go, to be honest. So it talks a bit about it here while you're not meeting the requirements. Again, a really great idea. Just I think it needs a little bit more polish. And they'll talk about your empire breakdown as well here. So all your empire resources. So they put a lot of work into advisors with this patch as well. So, mainly aimed at new players, obviously. So not something I can really confidently comment on as to exactly how useful they are. I did have one on when I was playing before just to see how they felt. And they were okay, I think, in general. But I'd really like to hear what new players have to think of this. I think, personally, if I was Firaxis, I'd be channeling a lot of this energy into improving the Civipedia, which is still in a really, really, really bad state, almost 18 months after launch. So the advisors, I feel like, are a bit of a band-aid fix over the more self-directed Civipedia. This is, much more directed by the devs as to your direction. Making the Civipedia much better sort of gives the players freedom themselves to explore and learn the mechanics, which I think would be a better way of doing it, but I understand that advisors like this definitely have a place. So as for the moment of victory itself, this has also been given a little bit more polish, a little bit more presence, as they say. It sort of has, there's a new screen here and there's a bit of a flyover of your empire, which I actually really quite like. And then it shows your Civ's unique artwork as well, or your leader's artwork, I think. Both of which are really cool. So yeah, the victory screen is just a little bit nicer now. And you do get to also look at the graphs as well from the victory screen when you finish, which still doesn't really hold a candle to some of the previous victory screens like Civ 5 or Civ 6 even. But it's something, it's progress. And now for probably one of the most important things from the patch actually, art and music. They are adding a significant amount of new tracks with this update. You can see 125 alternate mix variations of existing Civ and ambient themes. Pretty insane stuff. So there's a lot going on here. This is just the generic ones as well, I believe. There's also so if you're playing a modern age Civ in Antiquity, that Civ has, a scaled back Antiquity version of its modern theme. So if you're playing, America in Antiquity, very similar to Civ 6, how they did it there. But that's a lot of new music. There is so much new music with this update. It's actually insane. The other thing they touch on here as well is there's a lot of new art as well. So, modern Egypt, exploration and modern North African buildings. There's a ton of new stuff like that, which is really, really cool. Again, Civ 7 continues to be the most amazing and beautiful strategy game of all time when you zoom all the way in and turn the UI off. This stuff's really cool. It's always really satisfying to zoom in on this game and just sort of marvel at the incredible levels of detail that they put into all these little buildings. In a similar vein, we've got some new unit assets as well. So there's some really, really cool new models here from the various cultures. All these different weapons that I'm sure people smarter than me would be very excited to recognize here. Pretty cool stuff. This is a big one here, balance adjustments for civs and leaders, which we'll get to, I think, a little bit lower. They just talk about here the fractal continents map. So, the new sea level option here is mentioned, which, allows you to make the sea level higher or lower on your maps. So that's pretty cool. More options for maps, I think, are always a good thing. And this new fractal continents map is really fantastic as well. These examples are almost maybe underselling it. These can be completely random, and I think we've come a long way from launch where the maps were 2 blocks separated by a line of islands. We've come a long way since then. I do think Civ 7's map generation is up there with the best in the series now. Really, really fantastic stuff overall. Alexander the Great is a free leader for everyone with this patch, so don't have to do anything, I don't believe, to claim him. Totally free forever. He's got some pretty interesting abilities that I'll probably go over in a future video, which I know I will go over in a future video. I've got an Alexander playthrough coming soon. Here's all his stuff, but I think I just wanted to highlight one bit of flavor here that whenever you convert a town into a city as Alexander, the city gets renamed to be like Alexandria and then the name. Really good bit of flavor there. I really enjoy stuff like that. For the age transitions, there's been some big updates here just to make things feel a lot smoother. So Civ selection now happens at the end of the current age, so you can look around, you can view the map, you can see what's going on before you make that decision as to who you're going to transition into if you are going to swap. Just a really good common sense change there that's kind of haunted the game since launch, that you had to try and memorize what was on the map. Like if you're going to pick a Civ like Inca or Nepal, you have to try and remember if your empire had mountains in it. So really good change there. Combat, we now have auto pan, so this just means that the camera kind of follows you around as your units get hit on the enemy turn, which I actually quite enjoyed, so I've kept that on, and it's worked quite well. Adjusted values for war weariness, so war weariness is now a lot harsher as it goes along. Again, especially with the changes to happiness, keeping your empire happy, keeping your empire not war weary is going to be really, really important. And interestingly, it kind of ties into raising now being faster. Raising really isn't something you'd ever do in Civ 7 previously, but now with the happiness changes and the uncapped settlement limit unhappiness, which we'll talk about a little bit down below, raising is now probably a pretty viable option in most cases, and now it happens faster in the later ages. For diplomacy, there's a few new things to keep in mind here as you're playing. So improved trade relations now has 25% increased influence cost each time it's performed, and something very similar for the befriend independent. Probably the biggest change for city-state, suzerain spamming, which has now been nerfed once again. We've come a long way since launch, where it was just such a fantastic strategy. Has been weakened again, but I still think it's quite strong. But now every single time you go to befriend independent, it's going to get more and more expensive every time. So something to keep in mind. And Siam, it works on them as well. So their unique action has a similar malice to it. So quite a few changes here in the economy section. I always find this economy section to be a real catch-all for a ton of changes that aren't really economy focused, but they all fall under this section anyway. Regardless, so you can now claim unimproved plots from your other nearby settlements during a growth event. So this is a very primitive form of tile swapping. So if two settlements have overlapping tiles, you can now claim ones that aren't already improved by other settlements. It just makes settling a little less awkward, but overall a pretty minor addition, although some people are really going crazy for this. Civ leader game effects for settlements not founded by you is now changed to captured settlements from any age. This is actually a pretty big change for all of these civs and leaders here. So previously how this worked is that on age transition, all of the cities you'd previously captured essentially became yours and stopped counting for effects. Like Persia, for example, has a civic that gives you, I think it's gold and culture from settlements you've captured from other civs. So that now will persist throughout the ages. Xerxes King of Kings, his extra gold that he gets from captured settlements is now going to be available throughout the entire game. I think that is really, really strong. This is actually a pretty massive change overall for all of these civs that it affects, so pretty excited to play with some of those. The military side of Civ 7 continues to be even more fantastic than it already is. Specialists have had a massive change. They no longer give 2 science and culture as a base yield anymore. Now, all they do is double the adjacency of the tile you put them on. So if you have a science, a library you've got down that has 3 resources around it, so it's got +3 adjacency, you put a specialist on that tile and it will now give an extra +3 science. And that's it. So it's a lot simpler, but overall I found specialists to be significantly worse after this change. So if you think about it, +2 science and culture, which is the default yield they got before, is like having +4 adjacency. Just to get to what you had before is quite the feat with the new system. I think it's a bit of a tricky one because I think 200% would be too strong. And I think 150% is too awkward of a number. So I'm not sure how they can fix this, but I do think specialists are really, really weak as of this patch, particularly because happiness is so much harder to come by now, or it's so much more important rather. And specialists now have significantly increased happiness and food costs as the age progresses. So overall, I think specialists are going to need a little bit of balance work after this patch, but we'll see how it goes. Maybe I'm in the wrong, and maybe my city planning is just garbage. Adjusted the growth curve in later ages to better pace population growth. I didn't notice this, but I'm sure someone will make a really fancy graph showcasing the changes, which I'll be very much looking forward to seeing. And almost all towns have the ability to purchase a subset of buildings when you specialize them. So all the town focuses now have been completely reworked, which is pretty cool. They're all very unique now. So 4 towns, for example, can buy military buildings in them. Urban centers can get science and cultural. Trying to think off the top of my head here, but the trade outposts can buy gold buildings, all that sort of thing. And you can buy, both tier 1 and tier 2 buildings now when you do specialize. So all the town focuses feel a lot better now, which I'm a big fan of. So these are the happiness changes that I was talking about before. So instead of unhappiness now, it used to be for every point of unhappiness, it was -2% to all yields. Now it's -5%, so it's significantly worse. So if you just have, 3 unhappiness in a city, that's -15% to all your yields. Pretty rough, except for food, mind you. But this now also goes up to a maximum of 80%. So it is really important to keep your settlements happy now, because even just 1 point of unhappiness can have a pretty substantial effect, particularly in the late game. There's no longer a cap on how much unhappiness you can get from being over the settlement limit. So previously, once you got to 7 over the limit, it stopped mattering, so it would actually cap out at -35 in all settlements. Now there's no cap, so you do have to respect the settlement limit a little bit more if you're going to go for those extreme wide games like military games. There's a lot more to think about now, and your empire is going to be a lot unhappier. Hence why raising is now a much more viable option. Okay, mementos. There's a lot going on here, so I've highlighted some of the more interesting ones that I think have been nerfed quite substantially, or at least changed substantially. So bifocals is now 25 influence per age after researching a technology in general. It used to be 50 influence after researching a tech or civic mastery, so that's been changed. This, I believe, what they're implying here is it used to be if you had Corona Civica in for all 3 ages, it would give you 1 settlement limit, then 2, then 3 for a total of 6. Now it should just give you 1, then 2, then 3 total, so 3 in the modern age. I'm not entirely sure that's how it worked in the first place. I thought it was the opposite, but clearly, they've made the change, so it was, right? So pretty big nerf there if that's true. Glass Harmonica, this is what I used to abuse science for my super fast science win on turn 9. It was one of the, last remaining percentage modifiers in the game. Now we've moved to another flat system, so 15 science and happiness per age when in an alliance for you and your ally. Still okay, I think, but really it's a shell of its former self, and it's a lot less abusable now. Potesquate, these are the Tecumseh mementos, if I'm not mistaken. Yep, they are. So now gives +1 food per age in towns for each city-state you're suzerain of. This used to be for all settlements, now it's just towns, so a pretty big nerf there. Shisa necklace, this was probably one of the most notorious mementos of them all. Used to give 100 influence when you became suzerain of a city-state. Now it's 50 per age, which is just generally a much smarter way of doing it. So better in the super late game, which is probably fair enough. It was really, really broken in Antiquity, so I think that's a fair change. Wampum Belt is very similar to above. It now only affects cities. Before it affected all settlements. So again, a really big nerf there to the Wampum Belt. Same goes for War Club. 1 combat strength is now only for infantry units instead of all units per city-state that you are suzerain of. So some big nerfs for all of Tecumseh's mementos, which was probably warranted. Maps and resources. So I mentioned the new map type above. It's really, really good. And tile yield is now differentiated across biomes. I haven't worked out exactly what the changes are to this, but desert and tropical, plains, grassland, those are all been changed now. Again, looking forward to someone actually working out what those are exactly. Reading some of these paragraphs here just gives you a bit of an idea of just how complicated some of this new map generation tech is. Erosion can now erode multiple tiles deep into land masses and is controlled by rules like avoiding plate boundaries, harder rock, and eroding more where westerlies and trade winds blow large waves into the coastline. This leads to subtle improvements to the shape of land masses. So well done to whoever's made this new map generation stuff, because it is really, really fantastic. There's also a change here to what counts as an island. So this used to be a landmass that was 15 tiles. Now it's 30. This is actually a pretty massive change for, these very two specific effects. So Hawaii and Nunn Modal. I think it'll make Nunn Modal a much more appealing wonder to go for in general, which kind of goes without saying, but there you go. Treasure convoys now only validate their path on their last move. So no more resetting your entire fleet's destination when one ship arrives. This is such a fantastic quality of life change that I wouldn't have even thought was possible. So again, well done to the team on this one. This is just going to cut down a micro of, doing what I'm sure you all did, which was try and keep in your mind like a memory map of all the different spots you're going to send all of your treasure fleets, so they'd all be sort of one tile apart from each other, but never on the same one, but you'd always screw it up and they would always keep resetting their path. Really fantastic change. And production buildings no longer contribute to the increased cost scaling for future buildings. They made this change a little while ago where every single building you build in a settlement increases future buildings by 10%. So production buildings would no longer count towards that, similar to warehouse buildings, which is interesting. I mean, production buildings I thought were already pretty good. So this is a buff on top of that. So I think now production building is going to be even more of a priority to build, considering they don't add that 10%. And unique improvements, big change to unique improvements here. So every time you build a unique improvement now in that same settlement, the same one, it'll increase the cost of future unique improvements of that same type by 50%. So again, coming back to my super fast science victory with monasteries, where you would just put a monastery on every single tile in your empire. Unfortunately, that is going to be really not so viable anymore. You're now much more incentivized to get lots of different unique improvements and then make, 1 or 2 in each settlement. I think that's probably fair enough. It was pretty insane. I think the unique improvements were super, super strong before. So a fair enough nerf, but I'll be a little bit sad about fun strategies like monastery spamming kind of going away, but it is what it is. So in the miscellaneous section here, this is one that people have been asking about a lot as well. So, how are you going to level up your leaders with legacy paths gone? They're all just triumphs now. So instead of leveling up by, completing the cultural legacy path 3 times, it's now going to be complete X amount of triumphs per age. That's how you're going to level up your leaders after test of time. So just an FYI there. And now we have the leader and civ balancing. So I've done a little bit of highlighting here as well to talk about the buffs and nerfs. It's probably not worth going over all of these individually because there's a lot here and they're all pretty simple changes. But notably, I think Ben Franklin is a lot stronger now. He now has a percentage bonus towards constructing buildings for every endeavor you've got going, which I think is really, really strong. Ashoka, Renouncer, I think is a lot worse. Pachacuti, I want to talk about Pachacuti in general. So his specialist next to mountains no longer have no happiness maintenance. They just have their maintenance cost reduced by 2. And specialists that aren't adjacent to mountains at all have their happiness actually increased by 1. So a pretty big nerf in general for Pachacuti in terms of happiness, which again is a lot more important now. But I want to say that Pachacuti is still going to be insanely good after this because Pachacuti is not even really a mountain leader. So much of his power budget is tied up in his newly added, I say newly added, it's been a while now, but his final line, which is you get in cities, 10% of your food gets converted into production. I would say that effect is about 90% of this guy's power, and Pachacuti might be my favorite leader in the game, right? I really, really like his playstyle, but he is not a mountain specialist right now. His flavor is being a food leader more than anything. It's so strong, that production effect. And I think until they sort of tweak that, he's always going to be this, weird blend of food and mountain, but strongly skewed towards food. And as much as I really like that effect, I think they need to take a look at it and move him more towards being a mountain guy, because that's kind of what he's all about, right? Right now, he's just about food, and I think it's thematically unfitting. So Simon Bolivar got some buffs. Charlemagne got a very slight nerf. Tecumseh here, I've highlighted a bit of both. He's received quite a few changes. So again, similar to his mementos, now he only gets the food in towns and the production only in cities rather than both in both. Also importantly, all independent powers now start friendly with him. I actually really like this effect. I mean, this is good added flavor rather than, taking away some of these more boring effects and adding in interesting ones. Really big fan of that. I think overall this is probably, it's hard to say if this is a buff or a nerf, but I think all independent powers being friendly with you from the start of the game is going to take a lot of pressure off you. It means you just don't have to make many units at all in the early game. You essentially have no threats that you're going to run into at all unless you manage to settle nearby them and anger them yourself. Overall, this makes him a super, super safe leader until you actually start to meet other civs. Friedrich Oblique got a slight buff. He now gets science from commendations earned by commanders. And Xerxes, King of Kings, as we said, now only gets 1 settlement limit increase in antiquity, 2 in exploration, 3 in modern, totaling to +6. That's how it used to work. Now it's just going to be +3 total by the time you get to modern. So a pretty big nerf there for him. But I think some of the other settlement changes more than make up for this nerf. Overall, I think King of Kings is probably a lot stronger than he was before, now that all captured settlements for the whole game count as captured. All right, and down to civs. I mean, we talked about this before, so these are the new test of time changes. That's all been covered already. New commerce screen, new advisor council, and the new main menu. Again, you'll note that as soon as you log in, it's all been sort of refreshed. Everything feels just generally a lot more polished across the board. A lot of the UI just feels a bit nicer, or at least it's new and it's different. So in the notes here, it's funny how they sneak in little things like this that I think are super impactful and super great for quality of life. So added a conquest decoration showing which districts need to be captured to conquer a city, including your own. See, it's now here, this little conquest tab under the decoration, similar to turning on stuff like yields. You can now turn on this, and it shows you all of the tiles that you would need to capture, so, fortifications to take over a city. So you can see here, I'm grey, Ada here is pink, and as I move and take over this district, it's very clear now what you need to capture and who owns what. I think this is such a fantastic quality of life update for war. So really, really good stuff. A great implementation of a mechanic that already existed, obviously. Like, you already have these little health bars, but they're real easy to get sort of lost in the combat. And it's just a much better way of doing it. And it's a really easy way to see at a glance, how many fortifications the city has. So really good stuff there. As well as city-state types are now visible from the Minor Powers tab of the Diplomacy panel, and it actually goes further than that. So if we go up here, in our Relationships tab now, you can see all of the city-states here, what type of city-state they are and who owns it, and you can click on it to just go there immediately. So this is such a fantastic change and just really, really good quality of life. This is the stuff I'm most excited for in this Test of Time update, just fixing things that have been annoying long-term players since launch. Stuff like this is so good. And I mean, this used to be a mod, but another mod bites the dust. Like, this stuff should be included by default in vanilla for all of our console players out there who sadly cannot get mods. So this is awesome. Really good change. In terms of audio, like I said before, there is a ton of new music out in this patch. So much new music. I hope they put it out on YouTube because Civ 7's music is really, really fantastic. And again, a whole bunch of new sound effects here I mentioned before. Every time you plug in a resource now, they've all got unique sound effects. They've added all sorts of stuff like that for heaps of buttons in the game, which just really helps a lot with feedback when you press stuff and do actions, which Civ 7 was always kind of lacking, particularly on stuff like the production screen. I still think maybe has a long way to go. There's not really much feedback when you press stuff in here. These city projects, for example, are probably a pretty big offender. There's still a lot of grey boxes in here that I think, I hope they have a look at this production screen one day, to be honest. That is, 34 pages worth of patch notes, very briefly touched on. There's a lot of detail I skipped over here. It's a tremendously big update, and I think for a lot of people, they have been waiting for an update like this to dive back into the game, an update that totally shakes up the core of the game and shakes up a lot of those systems that have been, nagging us all for almost 18 months now. So really, really big patch. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, leave it a like. Let me know what you're most looking forward to in the patch, or if there's anything you like or dislike about the patch. Let me know down below. And if you want to see more stuff like this, I'll be releasing a lot of test of time content in the next few weeks. So if you want to see that, then you can subscribe as well. But otherwise, thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you have a good one. See you later. Thank you, as always, to the channel members who support me month to month, which is Chris J, Int Paladin, Awesome Daisy, Chase Bandy, Tronty Wanty, and Shamal TV. Thank you very much for your support, as always. It's very much appreciated.